Okay, hi everybody. This is Eric Hangen from the Carsey Center for Impact Finance at University of New Hampshire. I think we're going to get started with our webinar on using data to better understand your community and promote equitable development. I think first we're going to have a word from our sponsor at JP
Yeah,
Morgan Chase.
yeah,
Mercedes, do you want to
thank you,
take it
Eric.
away?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Mercedes Mortazavi from JP Morgan Chase. I manage our pro competition. Thank you for joining us. This is our part two, second webinar with the University of New Hampshire, and this is part of our larger pro neighborhoods peer learning for the year. And so we're really excited to have Eric here talking about using data to better understand our communities and promoting equitable development. One note, I would love to hear feedback from you all on not just this webinar, but also future topics. We're definitely revamping our peer learning next year and working on different topics that would be of interest. So feel free to email me directly or at pro.neighborhoods@jpmchase.com. And also this webinar is being recorded, so we will circulate that afterwards as well.
Great. Thank you, Mercedes. So I guess a little bit about what we're going to cover here. It's sort of main topics and a little bit of housekeeping before we dig in. So, I mean, an hour and a half is not a lot of time to go over all the ins and outs and data. So I tried to pick stuff that was sort of just focusing in on practical tools. I'm going to keep the main focus of the webinar just on common sources of data, like where can you learn, you know, you're interested in a certain topic, where could you go to get data about that topic as it applies to your community. I'll spend a little bit of time just giving a couple quick examples of some techniques to help make your data pop a little bit more. That's what the part that I'm calling here the 4 C's of analysis. And then lastly, I'm going to wrap up with just a really quick look at a couple of free and very cool data analysis software tools that are pretty accessible, and I would recommend to anybody if you're, you know, a big part of your job has to do with you know, processing data or spinning a story out of data. Before I get any more into the content, I just wanted to briefly introduce, there's 2 other folks in the webinar with me here that you'll want to know are here. One is my boss, Michael Swack, who runs the Center for Impact Finance at Carsey at University of New Hampshire. And so he'll be available alongside of me to answer any questions that you might have about data or about the work we do with data. And then we also have a very special guest, Maggie McCullough, who is the CEO of PolicyMap.com, which is, we're going to cover a little bit in this webinar. I think it's a great tool. And so she is actually going to take the reins for a little bit to give you all a demonstration of the just a few of the many capabilities of that site. And one last housekeeping detail: in your chat box for Zoom webinar chat, you should hopefully see a message from Bianca, who's also with Carsey and is helping us to manage the webinar, inviting you to type your questions into the chat panel, and we will, you know, one of us will answer your question. So please do feel free to use that, you know, right off the bat from the get-go. Okay, so goals for the webinar, really hoping that you will learn about a few new places that you can find and access data about your community, especially as it pertains to issues of social equality and lending, since you're all CDFIs who are interested in neighborhood revitalization type work. We'll give you some tips to get some more insights from data and point you in the right direction for some software tools that you can use. But on those last 2 points especially, I mean, it's, you know, we're really just trying to seed you with some ideas, and you won't come away from the webinar, I'm afraid, knowing how to use some of the tools I'm going to go over. which are like freeware geographic information systems and open source data analysis through Tableau Public and stuff like that. But you will at least have an idea of how to learn about it more and what you could do with it. So I'm going to dive right into common sources of data and just go through, if you're trying to understand trends in a community, where could you go? And I'm going to start with the most obvious, but hopefully show some cool ins and outs of it, the census data. So the Census Bureau collects on neighborhoods, a full count of everybody living in your neighborhood every 10 years, or hopefully full count if they're doing a good job. But then it also does a sample of people every year. And at the neighborhood level, which is usually comprised of census tracts and census block groups, you can get data that's where they take sort of 5 years worth of those samples and average them together. And then that's sort of the best data you can get from the Census Bureau on the sort of neighborhood level. So for example, right now, the most recent American Community Survey data that's out is 2012 through 2016, 5-year average data. So it's an average of all the surveys collected across those 5 years in whatever neighborhood you're getting. The 2013 through 17 5-year average data are coming out in December. So I'm going to show you how you could do a data pull of data for all the neighborhoods in a city on some topic that's of interest to you. We'll maybe use income as an example. But before I do that, there's a couple things that you should know before you go off and download your ACS data. One is that margins of error for this data source tend to be very large, especially at the neighborhood level. So you need to be very careful concluding that a change has occurred in your neighborhood when you see you see the poverty rate go up or down by a couple of percentage points. That could easily just be sort of the statistical noise that occurs when you don't have a large sample. So just be cautious in interpreting the data. Okay, so I'm going to just go up here and oops. Here we go. Share my web browser with you. Okay. So to get the easiest way to download lots and lots of census data all in one go is to go to the American Fact Finder website, which is part of the Census Bureau. You can go to www.census.gov and just browse to it, or factfinder.census.gov. I gave you a direct link as well in the PowerPoint slide that you were looking at. But let's say we want to download data on income. We want to look at incomes in Baltimore City by neighborhood, and are there stark differences in income across neighborhoods or across demographic characteristics, perhaps within the city. If we go to this advanced search, this is the sort of advanced search tab. So I click on here. I'm in advanced search. Then I can use these filters to find some data about the city. So here, let's look for data at the census tract level. So we go to geography. We select that our geographic type that we want to look at is census tract. We're going to look in the state of Maryland. We can look in Baltimore County and Baltimore City. We can select all census tracts within Baltimore City. So we can select that. And note that will load up in this little box, our selections of what we're looking for. So now it knows that that's the geography we're looking for. So now maybe we can, and already a list of items that we can look at comes up with. It comes up on our screen, but it's thousands of items, so we need to narrow it down a little bit more. So we can go into topics. We could maybe pick the data set. We could say, okay, I want the 2016 ACS 5-year estimates. And we could say I want to get information on income and earnings for individuals. And we could go and now we have a list of topics that are related to income and earnings for individuals that come from the 2016 American Community Survey 5-year estimates. And when we select what we want, we're going to get the results for all census tracts within Baltimore, Maryland. So I could pick this item here, median income in the past 12 months. So I just double click on that. I see a question here. If you use a statistical testing tool to see if there is a change in a percentage across 2 5-year data sets, which that is the way I would want to do, is maybe pick non-overlapping data sets, then can we be confident that the change is real even for small geographies? I mean, sure, yeah. So that's exactly. My caution would be you'd want to test for statistical significance with these large margins of error. Yes, and the level of confidence that you're talking about here, if they're using a 90% confidence level, what that's sort of saying, if you repeated the survey 100 times, 90 times out of 100, you'd end up with results that across those two surveys are different. So with keeping it at a layman's level and without getting into a stats class, yeah, then you could be confident that the change is for real and is not statistical noise. So here are and here's another. Can I elaborate what I mean by non-overlapping data sets? Sure. So if you want to test, if you want to look at a change in, let's say, poverty rate in the neighborhood, I would pick looking at, so our most recent 5-year data set is the 2012 to 2016 American Community Survey 5-year averages. So I would compare those numbers to the 2007 to 2011 5-year averages, so that I'm looking at totally, there's no overlapping years within the data, because otherwise they'd actually be sharing. Like if I compared 2012 to 2016 5-year averages to 2011 to 2015 5-year averages, actually most of the data in that comparison would be exactly the same data. So it would be, you're more likely to detect a change if you pick 5-year periods that don't overlap in years. Hopefully that helped with that question. Please, thanks for all the questions coming through on the chat. That's great. Okay, so here we have a data set that now comes up, and you can, so it's going for every census tract. We could easily add to that download if we wanted a set of columns for all of Baltimore City and for Maryland State, or even for the country, so that we could compare how any of these neighborhoods stacks up against the city as a whole. And we can see that this particular item that we pulled actually gives us a breakdown of income by race and by age of the householder, by family structure of the household, etc. So we have a bunch of different ways that we can look at the data already. We could also we could download this data. I'm not going to actually walk through this part, but if you hit download, you can download an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV of the data that you could analyze in statistical software, or pull into any of the freeware analysis programs that I'm going to talk about later, like Tableau or QGIS. We can also create a simple map here. So we just click on this button, create a map, and let's say click on a data value in the table to map. So let's make a map of just median income for households. So I just click on this value, and okay, it says the selected data values to map our the estimate of median income for households by census tract. And we're going to get all of Baltimore here. So I just press show map. And voila, we get a nice thematic map of income by census tract for the whole city. One cool thing to note here, actually, I do want to show you this. If I hit download here, we can download a PDF of this map, or if we were GIS users, Geographic Information System users, and again, I'm going to show you how to get some free GIS software at the end of the webinar. We could download shapefiles so that we could actually use them in our own GIS program. Okay, so I just, given how much there is in the census, I think it's worthwhile to know that you can do this, because you can download large data sets, large tables. You could pull all kinds of different geographies that you might want to compare. And beyond just the census and the American Community Survey, there's other data that you can get in American Fact Finder, such as like county business patterns data. You want to know how the employment breakdown of like which industries are growing and which industries are shrinking in your county. You could get that from American Fact Finder as well. So in the search feature, when you go to topics, you can sort of browse through for topics that you might be interested in. Okay, so I'm going to hop back out of this. I hope that I'm going to do this right. Okay, new share. Go back to our PowerPoint. So within the PowerPoint here, I kind of left you'll have a recording of this, but I also left you sort of some step-by-step tips here on how you can pull tables from American Fact Finder, how to grab a shapefile. So just again, some of the other data sources available, zip code and county business patterns. So even if the zip code is maybe closer to your neighborhood level, you could actually look at what kinds of businesses are in the zip code where you're doing your work, which sectors are growing, etc. There's some economic census data as well that also gets at economic data. That doesn't get down to neighborhood level. That just does county and place, which by place the census means like Baltimore City would be a place, like a town, or a city would be a place. A couple more things about if you this was all basic stuff to you and you're ready to do more and game to sort of do more advanced analysis using census data. A couple of things, a couple good resources for you here. One is this top website here, NHGIS, that you can download really large data sets of census data that's already formatted for use in statistical software. So that can be a little bit faster if you're like a real stats nerd, instead of bouncing down tables from American Fact Finder the way I showed you. Another great tool, but one that you might need help with unless you do have some stats background, is the public use microsample data. So with American Fact Finder and the tables that you get from American Community Survey, what you kind of get are whatever crosstabs of the data they wanted to show you, but you don't have access sort of to the individual survey responses the way you would if you had sort of done a survey yourself. But with PUMS, public use microsample data, you actually do have access to the individual survey results. So you can make your own crosstabs. So for example, you could do like I had one group that I was doing some work for in Vermont that was really interested in intervening in the housing market, helping folks who lived in manufactured housing, because they felt that, anecdotally, that they had seen a lot of manufactured housing in the state in poor condition, and they wanted to know more about who lived in manufactured housing and how many of them really owned their unit and all kinds of stuff like that. So we could do a deep dive, like really looking really in detail at you know, family structure, education level, occupation of people who lived in manufactured housing, right, as well as other characteristics of the housing itself. And PUMS data is what will allow you to do that. I have a student in a class right now that I'm teaching at the university who's really interested in creating housing to support grandparents who take care of their grandchildren, where, you know, the grandparent is the primary caregiver. And again, we're looking at how we might use PUMS data to be able to create a better profile of who those grandparents are and what their needs might be, again, using census data. You can, one thing to know about census data is if you're trying to create sort of a long-term trend line for how things are going in your neighborhood, you need to be aware that census tract boundaries can change and often do with every decennial census. And so that can create problems where, you know, what boundaries a given census tract has are not constant from one census to another. But there is a database called the Neighborhood Change Database that you can actually purchase that will give you census data going back all the way to 1970 that is adjusted for those changes in census tract boundaries. And then lastly, you can also purchase a lot of projections for census tracts. So one is, for example, this website here, Esri, who they make GIS software. So here's another question. For people who know enough stats to be dangerous, but aren't really economists, are there any resources that teach how to use things like PUMS? So there are actually on YouTube, there are a bunch of good tutorials for using PUMS, and the PUMS website has a lot of documentation as well on using it. And it will even give you like little test files that, it's called like replication files to see if you can replicate certain results, then you know that you're using the PUMS data correctly. It's not actually that hard to use if you're an SPSS user. The biggest challenge in working with PUMS data is that PUMS data is weighted, which means that for any given row in the data set, one row does not represent one household or one individual in your community, but rather it might represent 385 households in your community or 20 households in your community. And there's actually a separate field in the data set itself that says how many households that record represents. And you can, there's a pretty simple command in SPSS where you can just tell it to weight your data using that variable, and then it should spit out pretty good results for you. The other complication is that, you know, if you think about census data, right, they're collecting data on both households and on individuals. So there's actually these two different data sets, one of households, one of individuals. And sometimes you may need to link back and forth between them. Like, you know, like what is the educational background of individuals who live in mobile homes? We kind of got to make a relationship between two different databases, but that's also doable. So there are tutorials out there. Maybe I don't know if there's a way to get follow-up information out to people. I don't have any of those sort of websites listed here in this presentation, but I could probably pull some together to share with people after the fact. Okay, so that's what I was going to do just for the introduction to census data. I wanted to start off with that because it is the most commonly used or commonly sought after, you know, set of data points that you know everyone hears about and knows about, and it is becoming a lot more accessible and easy to use. I certainly remember when I was starting out like 25 years ago as a planner, that it was this really highly specialized skill to be able to find census data. You had people who did nothing but that, but now pretty much everybody can do it. So speaking of disruptive forces, though, within data analysis, I want to turn to our attention to PolicyMap here. So I'm going to turn over to Maggie McCullough in a second, who is the CEO of PolicyMap.com. But I just want to give sort of my own endorsement of it, that for anyone on the webinar who I don't know how I say, like if you found yourself being the least bit sort of put off by having to go through all the steps that I was showing you on American Fact Finder, you know, imagine having to do that for, like, learn a whole new system of downloading data for all these other data sources, right? And how complicated that could be. And do you even know if that data source is there or not, or how to use it? PolicyMap kind of cuts through all of that problem. It gives you a one-stop shop for a really wide range of data on community development issues. It just, and Maggie will show you some of the different different data sources that's all sort of put together in one convenient place that has a really cool, easy to use mapping interface. And a lot of it is free. There is a subscription, and I guess, Maggie, you'll probably talk about sort of what's available for free versus with subscription. But so in general, you know, my recommendation to anyone who's, you know, maybe your organization is we're working on a neighborhood plan and we want to get some data about our neighborhood. Where should we go first? Where I would say you should go first is to PolicyMap. Just see what you can find out about your neighborhood on PolicyMap. You'll be surprised at how much information you can pull together really quickly, and that's really good stuff, and from a whole wide range of sources. It really is a disruptive force in the field. Where, you know, before, like a lot of the stuff on PolicyMap, you might have had to go pay thousands of dollars for a consultant. And I know, because I was one of those consultants, right? And now you don't. And that's a really good thing for the field, because now you can save your money and use it on other kinds of programming and planning, rather than on hiring consultants to do data acquisition for you. So I will turn it over now to Maggie, if you want to share your screen, Maggie, to
Sure.
give.
So yeah, thank you. You know, so much of what you've said is actually why we created PolicyMap in the first place. So that's interesting. I was working at the Reinvestment Fund, CDFI here in Philadelphia, doing policy work. I was trying to make maps of data that I had pulled down from the census, and this is a while ago, and I didn't know ArcGIS. I didn't know how to join files. I took an ArcGIS class. I came back. I sat down. I didn't know what to do with it, and that was one. And we were doing consulting work for states and foundations and around the country. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could collect all the data we could get our hands on and put it into a web-based tool that was easy to access, so that people didn't have to have a statistical background, they didn't have to have a PhD, they didn't have to know ArcGIS or other mapping software in order to make maps of geographic data. And so that was sort of the reason that we started it. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. There we go. So this is the PolicyMap maps page. And, you know, very quickly, as I said, we set out to find as much data as we could and load it into this single platform. We have almost 40,000 indicators now. Some are public, like Census and ACS and county business patterns, crime data from the FBI, there's tax data from the IRS. And as it gets updated by the source, we update it in PolicyMap. We also license data from third-party data providers where we haven't been able to find a good public source for that data. So home sale prices, vacancy data, both residential and business vacancy, and school performance. And we always try to load data at the lowest geography possible. So block group, there's some things that we've done at a block level, but for the most part, we do it at block group and then above, right? So block group, census tract, zip code, county, and so on. And so as you zoom the map in and out, it's going to shade at the geography that it thinks makes most sense at that zoom level. The data is in these menus for exploring, we have demographic data, income and spending data, housing, lending, quality of life. The data are both layers. So this is going to be data that's shaded at a census tract or a zip code, as well as points. And these are going to be dots on a map that are going to show locations, things like grocery stores or farmers market or SNAP retail locations and so on. And you can put things on top of each other on the map. So you can have a thematic map, and you can have, and I'm going to show you one in a minute, and you can have points on top of that if you'd like. There's economic data around workforce, education, health, federal guidelines, and then some analytics. All of the public data that are in these tabs, you can see on maps as a basic user in PolicyMap. And a basic user there's no charge. We need your email address because as you make maps, you're going to be able to print them, which in this case means save as a PDF or a PNG file so you can pull it into your presentations. And you'll be able to have a folder where you can sort of save your work and go back to it later. All of the proprietary data has to stay behind the subscription wall. Those are the license agreements that we have. And some of the more advanced functionality is also behind the subscription wall. One of the other, so in addition to exploring the data through these menus, you can also, on our website, you can go to the data page and you'll be able to see a scrolling list of all the data that's in here. You can also download a spreadsheet if you would prefer to see all of it in one place. And I always mention to people that we have been writing a blog for almost 10 years. And if you have questions about any data, this is a good place to search. You can just search by topic here because chances are we've done some writing about it. So the other way to find data rather than exploring through these menus is by using the data search bar, which was something that we worked on for a fair amount of time and is pretty cool. And if we look at housing cost burdens, you can see that it's pulling through the metadata from all of the data that's in PolicyMap to find an indicator that's related to the search term that I typed in. So here are estimated number of homeowners who are burdened by housing costs between 2012 and 2016. So that's the 5-year ACS estimate that we were talking about. The map shades, you can see in the legend comes up right away. It tells you that the darker purple places on the map are places where more than 24.68% of homeowners are burdened by their housing costs. And then you can see the different shades of purple and what their values are. All of the maps have this very simple sentence at the top. Again, this was designed, you know, you didn't have to be a researcher. Everybody can read the simple sentence, but there's a pull down box that gives you a lot of information about what this means. This means that their monthly housing costs are more than 30% or more of their income, what the housing costs include. All of this data is coming from the ACS and Census, but we try and take their definitions and make them even simpler to understand and interpret. And then the location search bar allows you to take it to any place, if one could spell properly, in the United States. So if we went to, say, Hartford, Connecticut, the map now takes us to Hartford. This is the city of Hartford. It put an orange outline around it, and it's showing me here in Hartford, these purple places, these darkest purple places are places where more than 33.85% of the homeowners are burdened by their housing costs. And if you click on the map, you can see for this particular census tract that it's actually 39.03%. And then in the info bubble, it compares it to all the geographies in which it sits. So if you're looking at Hartford and you're thinking about what's going on in that place, you know that it is, it has a larger percentage of homeowners who are cost burdened, say then the county for sure at 27.46%, but it gives you all these other geographies to relate this particular place to. This is also all available as a basic user. The ability to see the information in the info bubble. Subscribers have the ability to change the ranges. They could have 2 cut points, 3 cut points, change the ranges if they want and apply it. They can also change the color ramp. Not everyone likes the default purple. And then when you've made a map that's of interest to you, as I said before, you can hit print and you're going to be able to export your work as a PDF or a PNG. You can create your own title. There's a lot of different attributes that you can put on the map, and you can zoom it in further, zoom it out. If, for example, I'm just going to do one more example. If we were looking at doing food investments in a particular place, one indicator that Reinvestment Fund recently put out was a limited supermarket analysis. And if we were in Memphis, Tennessee, we just now can look at the LSA in Tennessee. We look at the legend, and the purple places are places that are defined as LSAs, limited supermarket access areas. The latest that this study was done was for 2016. Again, this tells us what it means. There's a variety of indicators that they've looked at to designate the place as a limited supermarket access area, including a population density, car ownership, and so on. So you can see in Memphis, you've got these places that have this designation. There are not, in close proximity, places for fresh food that people can easily get to. So if you're thinking about investing in fresh food and you would like to really make an impact in a place, these could be places where that kind of investment would make a lot of sense. And then you can look at other things about those places in combination. So opportunity zones, it's very popular these days. Designated qualified opportunity zones. If you layer them on top, you can now see that of all those places that were purple in Memphis and don't have access to fresh food necessarily, some of them are also designated opportunity zones, which may mean that financing a place in one of these areas may be simpler, may be more beneficial, may have some funds attached to it. So it's just another way to zoom in on areas where investment might make sense. And you can put points on top. You can upload your own investments to PolicyMap and see, I have these 10 potential sites, where do they fall? You have a portfolio of investments, you could upload those and see where they fall. You can run reports. You can download the data. These are subscriber features. And you can also, and what I'll show you now is a part of the basic user, you can look at where you have resources in these areas that perhaps could use an investment, right? Or could use help to sort of bring more fresh food into these places. So these are nonprofit locations from the NCCS. And I'm going to filter and say, of these nonprofit locations, I just want to see those that are food and nutrition related. So now you get a subset of these points. So these orange squares are food and nutrition related. And these, 1, 2, 3, they're sitting in areas that are limited supermarket access areas and are designated opportunity zones. So it may be that these are entities with a little more infrastructure, more financing, could better serve that population there. Excuse me. There are other ways to do this in PolicyMap. You can layer on 3 different layers at a time in what we call 3-layer maps. And that allows you to say, all right, just show me on the map places that meet these 3 criteria. And you can really use it as a tool for site selection. And I think that was pretty much, Eric, what I was going to show.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the presentation here. So again, you know, I would recommend it, you know, independently, right? I'm not being paid to say this by PolicyMap, but hopefully you saw that just from the demonstration how easy it is to use and how much data you can get with really a lot less work than, you know, so most of the other tools that I'm going to show you, it's really, you have to, they're most appropriate when you really need to dig. You have some unique research need that you want to have sort of more control that you can get through that interface. So again, I think it usually makes sense to see if you can do it first in PolicyMap, and then go to other tools as needed. And there is a tutorial here that I've put the link in for, where you can learn how to use PolicyMap. But it's actually also pretty easy just to click your way through it. So I created some slides here that will share about how you could do a couple of the tasks that Maggie was just showing you. So we'll share those later. So I just wanted to go, we'll spend just a few more minutes on a couple of other data sources that you might like to use. I'm not going to demo them. And again, in almost every case, the data that I'm talking about, you can access quite a bit of it through PolicyMap. There are usually a few really detailed indicators that maybe you need to go to the original source to get. But again, PolicyMap often your best first bet. So on for anyone interested in residential lending, the HMDA data, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, is a great place to go. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that's this web link down here, has made HMDA data a lot easier to access and use than where it used to. It still lives on the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council website, which is the second link. But this top link at the CFPB, it's a lot easier to use. So with HMDA data, you can get information about how many people applied for a loan, for what? Was it for home improvement, for refinance, for purchase? A little bit about the borrower characteristics, particularly around race and gender and income. And then also you can get information about the type of the loan. Was it an FHA or VA loan, or a conforming loan? You can also find out what lender made the loan or reviewed the application. And you can even find out the top reasons, the reasons why, if a loan was denied, the reason why it was denied. So you could use this data to find, for example, and you would, and Maggie, you should interject if this has changed. But let's say you wanted to, you're a home mortgage lender, and you want to identify who the top mortgage lenders are in your market, because maybe you're a CDFI who does, like you do a second mortgage for home purchase assistance, and you'd like to know who are the top first mortgage lenders in the market, because you want to see whether your loan product could pair up with their loan product. And maybe you could even look at, among the top mortgage lenders in the market, who has the highest denial rate, like who's turning the most people away. So you could maybe go and offer them some services. Hey, why don't you refer your denied borrowers to us so that we can provide them counseling or something like that. So you could do that kind of analysis with the raw HMDA data. And again, you'd start by downloading it here at consumerfinance.gov, and then you could analyze it. Either you could, with the CFPB tools, it gets pretty easy to analyze it. You could finish up your work in Excel even, although usually I will process it in a statistical software package like SPSS, and I'm going to show you a couple of options for free stats software. Another great data source, CRA, small business lending data. I believe that this data is largely available in PolicyMap, but you can also download it at FFIEC. Here's just one example of some work that Carsey did in Miami for a nonprofit we were working with, actually a JP Morgan Chase grantee. And we were able to look at, they had two target neighborhoods in Miami, and we were able to look at the amount of small business lending activity that was happening in each of those neighborhoods. And we actually pulled in some additional data that comes from a data set I'm going to show you in a second about local small business employment levels. So we were able to look at sort of benchmark the amount of lending activity in these two target neighborhoods compared to Miami-Dade County overall. So that could be pretty useful, obviously, if you're in the lending to small businesses space. So where we got those employment numbers from is from this data source called Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics. Sometimes people call it LED as well. Let's see, do we have another chat here? Okay. Oh, will this, sorry, I was distracted by a question coming. Will this webinar be available to watch again later? Yes, we are recording the webinar, so you will be able to watch it later. So at the LEHD data gives you very detailed data down to the block level on how many jobs are on that block and in what economic sectors, and actually even a little bit of information on how much those jobs pay, like how many are sort of relatively well-paying jobs versus very low wage jobs. And you can also get data on commuting patterns. So for example, maybe you're working in a particular census tract and you want to know how many people of the jobs that are in your census tract, like that there's a grocery store down the street and there's that office building across the way or the factory further along. They've all got jobs. What percentage of those jobs is held by people who live in your neighborhood? You could find that out with LEHD data. And there is a map browser interface to use LEHD data that's called On the Map. It's less user friendly than PolicyMap. Let me just leave it at that. But it's usable, and they've got a tutorial for it, and you can get some really detailed data. Again, some basic LEHD data points are available in PolicyMap. If you just want to look at like sort of the number of jobs in a census tract or block group, I think you can get that via PolicyMap and maybe a few more data points. But if you wanted to do something like commuting patterns analysis, you might have to go to On the Map to do that. Another data source that I really like, I'm not sure how much it's being maintained currently. I hope it is. I think it is still under the new administration. Is that HUD actually has a GIS data website where you can get all kinds of information about HUD investments in your community, as well as what used to be really hard data to find. Is called the CHAS data, which is like a special tabulation of census data that's done by where all the households are broken down by the percent of area median income that they are. So you want to look at like how many people are housing cost burdened, but not just by income, but by how many low and moderate income households, right? 80% of AMI or below are housing cost burdened in your area or something. That would be the CHAS data that you're looking for to do that. And you can get the CHAS data on the HUD EGIS website. You could find out what home expenditures or CDBG expenditures have been made in your neighborhood, including even at the point level. You can get maps of that stuff. You can find out how many folks are using Section 8 vouchers in your neighborhood. And then there's some very cool data sets that HUD has put together that are sort of measures of how much opportunity for, let's say, social advancement is there in a given neighborhood. And so for folks who are interested in equitable development, these are really great data sets. They've calculated indices of, in this census tract, what is the proximity of jobs to this census tract, looking not only within that tract, but all the other tracts nearby. For this census tract, how close is it to good schools? What environmental health hazards are there in this census tract? So there's a bunch of different indexes of opportunity that HUD tracks that are really useful if you're trying to get a sense of whether your neighborhood is a place that is a good launching pad for people to move up in socioeconomic status or not. And all of these data sets are available for download either as spreadsheet files or as GIS shaped files. They come in like these big honking downloads that are for the whole country, so you have to kind of cut them down to find your neighborhood in them, but it's workable. It's a good, nice data source. Bunch of other data sources that you could consider. Obviously, there's this day and age, there's so much out there that I can only just touch on some things. We can't fully do them justice. There's great Bureau of Labor Statistics data on, more up to date than the census would give you on employment and unemployment rates. Again, that I believe is available through PolicyMap. EPA has a bunch of very cool environmental justice data that you can get. So the example that I put on the slide here is actually a cancer risk map that you could find. There are a lot of two great websites for health indicators data. County Health Rankings is county level, as the name would suggest. But if you happen to be working in a relatively large city, the Center for Disease Control 500 Cities project will actually give you tract level estimates of a whole range of different health issues, like what percentage of people are obese or are smoking or have high blood pressure or stuff like that. Certainly local data is always really important to consider. Most research that I do on, for neighborhood revitalization work, and I know that many folks on this webinar are, if you're working with pro neighborhoods, you are probably doing some neighborhood revitalization work. Local parcel data or tax assessors data is usually very important to get. You can map it and analyze it in GIS software. You can usually get information about home sale prices, sometimes about building conditions. You could get code violations data as well from your local agencies. I often will get data on 911 calls or police incidents and map that kind of stuff as well. So certainly talking to your state and local agencies about what data they can make available, or maybe even already have available on open data websites. If you're in a relatively large city, you might want to look for your local chapter member of the National Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. Again, that's the National Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, and see if you have a nonprofit in your city that is already sort of curating local data for people such as yourself to use. You might also want to give a call to your regional Federal Reserve Bank and talk to their community development specialists or policy analysts. They're often producing reports on data about your region, and they might have some specialized data that they've been putting together that they're at least able to share results. There are a bunch of other websites such as Zillow for house prices or citydata.com that you can scrape for good data. Lastly, I did not put this on the list, but big data is increasingly useful stuff to think about analyzing at the neighborhood level. So big data, I mean, like scraping social media data. For example, there was actually a study that was just published a few months ago by an economist at Harvard who used data from Yelp and found that the number of posts on Yelp about a neighborhood's restaurants was predictive of future economic growth in that neighborhood. So if you can think about a way to connect to that kind of data, that could be very useful. There are actually folks who track flu outbreaks using Twitter feeds. And that kind of social media data, a relatively straightforward way to try to access it is actually using one of the free software platforms I'm going to talk about later in this webinar, Tableau Public. Through Tableau Public, you can actually there are folks who've already created what are called data connectors, where you can kind of grab data from Twitter and get like a data set of Twitter posts, for example, that have hashtag your neighborhood, right? And maybe find out what other hashtags are people listing when they also are talking about your neighborhood. Okay, so that's our overview here of data sources. Again, please do chat right in if you've got a question that you'd like to pose about other data sets you're considering or ways to work with data sets. But I'm going to move on to the last sort of third of the webinar here, where I was going to focus a little bit on just some tips for analyzing data, and then a couple of tips for where you can get some freeware. I think I saw someone raise their hand, so I think we have one question. I don't know if Bianca, if you can help me with that, or I think do people need to chat in their questions?
Yeah, so we don't have the ability to open people's mics, unfortunately. So if anyone has a question, please type into the chat box and we'd be happy to answer it.
Okay, great. So yeah, I forget the name of the person who raised their hand, but if you're able to use chat to type in your question, that would be great, and we will definitely get to it. I'm going to keep going for now, but we will circle back to any questions as they appear. Okay, so I have the goals slide way at the beginning of the webinar. I mentioned you saw something called the 4 C's of analysis. And this is just a little simple trick that you're wading through lots of data. What are some ways you can make your data come alive? Think about 4 C's: change, comparison, concentration, and correlation. And so I'll just show some examples of using each of those 4 C's to make data a little bit more interesting, and maybe talk a little bit about some pitfalls. I'm kind of giving you like the really simple infomercial version, and there are, at the end of the webinar, I'll also give you some other learning resources where you could get much deeper into any of these C's of analysis. So change is the most obvious one, probably. Looking at how something changes over time, obviously a good idea to trend something out. Here's one thing that you might do. If you're in real estate or in residential lending, what are home sales trends in your neighborhood? You could look at that trend over time. When you're looking at trends over time in neighborhoods, the most important thing to be aware of is volatility, particularly due to small numbers of observations. So you need to be careful, for example, if you're looking at house prices at the census tract level. If let's say this is, a census tract with only 68 home sales or 73 home sales in a year, is going to have the median house price is going to bounce around quite a bit, just because there's such a small number of sales. If we were taking the median of 1,000 home sales for the entire city per year, you're going to get a much smoother looking line than you would if you look at just a neighborhood level. So one thing you can do is at least just draw a trend line, right, to see where's the overall arc going. You could also try averaging multiple years of data. Let's like they do with the ACS. So look at the average. How many home sales on average were for the past 3 years, and compare that to the 3 years before then. So just some things to think about when looking at change at the neighborhood level. Another thing always to be aware of when you're looking at somebody else's graph of change, look at where the origin is of the axis of the graph. A lot of people have fun making other people believe that there's enormous change going on by making, if I made 40 the bottom of this graph, this tiny little decline from 87 to 81 home sales would start to look like a massive drop off. But if I present the graph correctly, where 0 is at the origin of the axis, we can see it for the slight change that it is. So consider scale. The example I have on my right is just a sort of a pre-infomercial for Tableau. I'll show you a live version of this actually in a sec when we get to Tableau, but you can actually link graphs of change over time to maps, and use maps to filter how you see the graph. So I'll show that later. The second C, comparison, just benchmarking your neighborhood against other neighborhoods. a control or comparison neighborhood would be a great idea if you're doing neighborhood revitalization work. Benchmarking to a larger geography, that would make sense. Any kind of crosstab. So here's an example of a crosstab where we're looking at the distribution of child poverty by the type of census tract. Whether it's a urban, suburban, small town, or rural census tract. Here we can see that while urban tracts have 23% of all children, they have 49% of all children in poverty. So they have a disproportionate share of children in poverty in this region of Western New York. We can also see, comparing over time, that while the share of children in poverty remains a disproportionate burden on urban census tracts, the burden has lessened slightly over time. So that's just a simple example of how you can use comparison to sort of make a point stronger. Concentration, referring to spatial concentration. The map on the left is a map actually that I made with QGIS, the free GIS software that you can download that we'll go over in a bit. And it's looking at racial and ethnic segregation in the Miami area. Again, this is for our client down in Miami. And you can see how their target neighborhoods of Opelika and Liberty City have a concentration of an African-American population. You can see how that population tends to be separated from a Latino population and also a white population that largely out on the Barrier Island there. Different group we worked with was the city of Rochester and a study of tax delinquent properties. And you can see just looking at the concentration of tax delinquent properties, you can see that they actually call it the crescent around the downtown of the city. You can see how you can get a sense of where, if you're interested in, maybe you're actually CDFI making loans to help people out who are in tax delinquency. So where are your potential borrowers located? Or maybe you're a neighborhood revitalization group looking at how tax delinquency is impacting neighborhood conditions. You want to know where those kinds of properties are concentrated. We can make a map of it in GIS. Last C of the 4 C's, correlation. How is one thing related to another? These are just some simple graphs that we made in Tableau. One here on the left looks at how access to health care is related to poverty, looking at just statistics by census tract, not for individuals. So we can see as the poverty rate of a neighborhood goes up, also the percentage of adults who lack access to health insurance also goes up. Each dot represents an individual census tract that's sort of plotted along each of those two measures. And then we can draw a correlation line or trend line sort of illustrating the relationship. And the graph on the right shows us a linkage between free lunch eligibility in schools, which is a proxy for the socioeconomic status of students in a school, with English test scores. So again, at any given school, as the percentage of children there who are eligible for free lunch increases, the percentage of students who get a passing score on their English proficiency exam goes down, right? So we can just make inferences about relationships that help to point out different social problems or potential interventions in social problems. All right, so last little bit is some infomercials for some free software that I would certainly recommend for anyone who wants to get deep into data analysis. Again, not nearly enough time to show you how to use all the tools, but hopefully point you in the right direction. The first is GIS software, geographic information software, to make maps. There's a great freeware out there called QGIS. It costs nothing, and it does everything that ArcGIS does and then some. And you can download it here at this website. And you can also get tutorials, etc. that can help you use all of the different features. You can do vastly advanced stuff in GIS. You'll probably only end up using a fraction of its capabilities. But here's one example. Just got a data set of 911 calls in Baltimore, and was able to make this heat map showing sort of where that activity was sort of concentrated. You could do other stuff where actually a lot of the research that I've been doing, we've been gathering data on loans. We compiled a data set, for example, for a project actually I worked on with Urban Institute, where we got a data set of every loan that had been made in the city of Detroit. And we were able to use GIS to then associate those loans with the characteristics of the neighborhoods where they were made, and sort of draw some conclusions about which neighborhoods were getting more lending activity for what types of land uses and by what kinds of lenders. So a lot of good uses for GIS. You can see that for a simple thematic map, you're just trying to make a map of like the poverty rate or the home ownership rate in a neighborhood. Probably PolicyMap is a better way to go. And you can also use PolicyMap to map some of your own loans. If all you wanted to do was just maybe make a map of where your borrowers are located or something like that, a fun and totally free website to do so is at this URL here, easymapmaker.com. And you could even map addresses using Easy Mapmaker and then bring them into GIS if you wanted to give the maps a fancier presentation or associate that data with other data points. So QGIS for me has been a great tool. Anyone if you're doing deep research into a neighborhood, I would highly recommend it. Next tool I wanted to talk about that I think is also going to be sort of a disruptive force for data analysis is Tableau Public. So if your job involves working with data, you should probably take a tutorial and how to use Tableau. I think it's going to really change how people interact with data and share data with one another. It's going to make certain kinds of data analysis a lot easier. So I'm going to, here's your website for downloading the software. Here's a tutorial about how to use it, just so you know that you have these links. What I'm going to do now is hopefully share my screen and show you a published Tableau workbook. So hopefully everyone can see this okay. So this is just a map of building permits in Detroit. So we pulled some open data from the city of Detroit itself on building permits. And we were able to, first of all, map it. And you can see that we've got the map color-coded depending upon the land use for which the permit was being pulled. And the size of the dot on the map is corresponding to the amount of the permit. And you'll notice that as I scroll over the map, these little information boxes actually come up with detailed information about each permit. So I can see that this big pink dot here down by the river was an institutional use, so maybe some kind of nonprofit institution, and that it was a $27 million project. Here was an educational land use, $14 million project. So we can pull detailed data, and also I can actually scroll through the years. I can make sort of a map movie here, showing where all the permits have been issued in the city of Detroit over time. And so what Tableau allows me to do is, I take raw data, and instead of giving somebody like a static graph, like you would if you used Excel and you create a PDF of a report, instead of giving somebody that, you could share with neighborhood residents or stakeholders, whoever you're trying to convince, this interactive web feature, right? Of which we've showing you this simple version here, where we've got an interactive map, and then other data underneath it. Again, we can hover over the map that's showing us maybe trends of building permits by year. It's surprisingly easy to construct stuff like this, and even and it's also surprisingly easy to take the same data that we use to make this map and make this table, and sort of presto changeo switch it over to be like a line graph, perhaps, or something like that. oh, this is what, okay, I was showing you my actual Tableau screen instead of the web feature, but here, so here's the actual published web feature. You can see it's the same as was on the screen. Here's another example of a Tableau web feature. I think this is the one that I gave a prelude to earlier. It's looking at poverty by neighborhood in Manchester, New Hampshire over time. So we have a map showing the poverty rate as of the 2016 American Community Survey. If we scroll over the map, we can see what census tract we're in, what the poverty rate was as of 2016. But then if we click on that census tract, the tract highlights, and then we actually get, we get a line graph of what's been happening to the poverty rate in that neighborhood over time since 1980. That's using the Geolytics neighborhood change database. So again, we can, this is a much funner way and much more interesting and engaging way to present data to neighborhood stakeholders or people participating in your planning process than the sort of static graphs that you would get doing the same analysis in Excel or something like that. Okay, let's see if I can go back out here to the PowerPoint. Lastly, I'd mentioned statistics software, like if you wanted to work with PUMS data or anything like that. There are two freeware statistics programs that you can use. One is called PSPP, which is open source software that mimics SPSS, as you sort of play on words that they made there. But you can do more sophisticated statistical analysis here than you could do in Excel if you wanted to like build a regression or look seriously at a correlation analysis. It's great software to make cluster analysis. Like let's say you have data about your borrowers and you want to sort your borrowers into groups that maybe by different demographic or income characteristics or the type of business that they run, or maybe you have survey results about your borrowers where they talk about like how they manage their money and what their biggest fears are about money or how they feel about borrowing. And you could use cluster analysis to create typologies of customers so that you could target marketing messages for different types of customers. And PSPP statistical software would help you to do that. You could use PSPP to build a credit default model looking at your loan records. So another use there. Lots of stuff you can do with it. At a more powerful level, ELSA free open source software. If you run into something you can't do with PSPP, you could do it with another stats package called R. So I've also provided the link for that. R is much less user-friendly, much longer learning curve. You'd probably want to take an honest-to-goodness statistics class that used R as a software rather than trying to learn it on your own. But all of the other ones, even PSPP, and especially Tableau and QGIS, are software packages that you can learn on your own. I would say Tableau, you could learn how to at least do some basic stuff in Tableau, like watching 2 hours worth of tutorials on the Tableau website. QGIS, maybe watch 3 or 4 hours worth of tutorials on their website, and you could be up and running with that. So it's a lot more accessible than you think. All of this kind of software has gotten a lot easier to use just in the past several years. Okay, so I wanted to leave some time for questions. I think we've got 15 minutes for any additional questions that people did want to ask. But if you're interested in learning more or sharpening your data skills, here's just some places you can go. First of all, UNH has a Master in Community Development Policy and Practice program where you can really go get into the details and even work towards a degree while learning this stuff. Also, if you're more interested in just a couple day long experience, I actually teach a workshop for the NeighborWorks Training Institute. I think it's not going to be offered in December, but I think the one after that, and I'm afraid I don't remember the city, but the workshop number is NR255. It's called By the Numbers, Understanding Social Inequality and Opportunity. And you will actually learn how to use QGIS and Tableau and apply it to neighborhood data. in that 2-day workshop. So that's also an opportunity. Certainly feel free to email me if you have any, the sort of one-on-one questions you want to ask about data that you're working with. I've provided my contact information below. And so thanks. We will turn it over. If there are any questions, I don't see any new ones coming in on the screen. We're just going to leave this time open here in case people do. Michael, did you want to add anything? Or I don't know if there are no further questions, whether we sort of sign off from the webinar early or how we want to handle that.
Yeah, we can sign off. The one thing I wanted to mention was the master's program that you put up there, and I think we're going to send out more information to people on Monday because I'll be doing a webinar in early November explaining it. But this is a program for adult practitioners. It's a low residency, just a couple weeks in the summer, and then most of it's online, and then a project in your community. And so we've had a number of practitioners over the years, and so if you are interested in a master's degree while you continue working that really focuses on the community development and community development finance work you're doing, I urge you to join the webinar or to take a look at the web. Feel free to contact either me or Eric with any questions you have.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Not seeing more questions. I guess we will sign off. But thank you very much for participating. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you do have any follow-up questions. Thanks.